"Let go of my mom, and I'll make you walk," said the 10-year-old black girl. Her voice didn't waver. It didn't plead. It simply stated a fact, as if reading from a contract already signed in realms beyond the courthouse walls. Judge Harrison Vale stopped mid-motion, his withered hands frozen on the stack of documents before him. For 5 years, he had been confined to that wheelchair, his legs useless since the stroke that nearly killed him. And now this child, this small braided girl in a press school uniform, dared to speak the impossible. The courtroom exploded. Laughter rolled through the gallery like thunder, cruel and dismissive. The prosecutors exchanged glances that said everything without words. Poverty breeds delusion. Court reporters leaned toward each other, whispering as if watching a tragedy unfold in real time. "That child's lost her mind," a woman in the third row muttered, shaking her head with exaggerated pity. This is what happens when they're raised without proper guidance. Elijah Brooks stood beside her mother, Maribel, who sat in chains accused of tampering with sealed court documents. Maribel had worked as a courthouse housekeeper for 12 years, cleaning judges' chambers, sweeping courtroom floors, emptying trash bins filled with secrets people assumed she couldn't read. Now she sat shackled like a common criminal, tears streaming silently down her face while her daughter faced the system alone. But Eliana wasn't desperate. She wasn't begging. At 10 years old, her eyes carried something far more dangerous than tears: clarity. She had spent enough nights watching her mother scrub floors in empty courtrooms to know that adults only notice children when it's convenient. The rest of the time, they speak freely, assuming small ears don't understand big words. "Girl," Judge Vale said, his voice sharp as broken glass, "this is a court of law, not a faith-healing tent. Your mother committed a crime. There are no miracles here, only consequences." The laughter returned, louder now, emboldened by the judge's cruelty. "Maybe she thinks she's in a Bible movie," someone shouted from the back row. Elijah didn't flinch. She tilted her head slightly, studying the judge the way scientists study specimens under glass. Then she spoke again, quieter this time, but with a weight that made several people stop laughing. "I know who framed my mother, and I know how to prove it." The courtroom hesitated for exactly 3 seconds before the mockery resumed, even crueler than before. "Little Miss Detective over here," a voice called out. But while everyone laughed at the girl who dared challenge their system, no one noticed 3 critical details. The small audio recorder tucked inside Eliana's backpack, its red light blinking softly. The way Court Administrator Ronan Pike had stopped laughing entirely, his jaw clenched tight as stone. The fact that Eliana's eyes remained fixed not on the judge, but on Pike, whose luxury watch glinted under the fluorescent lights, a watch worth more than 3 years of his official salary. And absolutely no one imagined that this 10-year-old girl had spent the last 4 months silently documenting every conversation, every late-night meeting, every whispered confession she overheard while helping her mother clean. If you're drawn to stories where faith confronts power and truth refuses to stay buried, like and share this video. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Make sure to stay with us, because what this child was about to reveal would not only free her mother, but expose corruption that reached into the very foundations of justice itself. Judge Vale slammed his gavel with unnecessary force, the crack echoing like a gunshot through the tense air. Enough. But before Elijah could respond, before the judge could slam his gavel one more time, we need to understand how a 10-year-old girl from the South Side came to stand in this moment. Because this wasn't luck. This wasn't desperation. This was preparation meeting purpose. And it started 6 months earlier, in the quiet hours after midnight, when courthouse floors needed cleaning and adults forgot that children have ears. Most nights, Eliana did her homework in the janitor's closet on the third floor while her mother worked. The closet smelled like pine cleaner and old mop water, but it had a small desk where Maribel kept her supplies, and Eliana had learned to focus on math problems while industrial floor buffers hummed in the distance. Maribel couldn't afford childcare, and leaving a 10-year-old home alone in their neighborhood after dark wasn't an option. So Eliana became her mother's shadow, a quiet presence pushing the supply cart from courtroom to courtroom, wiping down benches, emptying trash cans filled with crumpled legal documents and coffee cups stained with lipstick. "Stay quiet, baby," Maribel would whisper. "Pretend you're invisible." And Eliana learned that invisibility was a superpower. Because when you're invisible, people forget you're human. They forget you have ears. They forget you understand English. It was a Thursday night in late June when Eliana first heard the conversation that would change everything. She was emptying the trash in Judge Vale's chambers while her mother buffed the courtroom floor outside. The door was cracked open, and voices drifted through from the administrative offices down the hall. Adult voices, relaxed and careless in the way people sound when they think they're alone. "The beauty of it," a man's voice said, laughter in his tone, "is that nobody questions the help. You need a scapegoat. You pick the one person who has access but no power to fight back." Eliana froze, her hand still gripping the trash bag. "Maribel?" another voice asked. She recognized it immediately. Ronan Pike, the court administrator. He'd always been polite to her mother's face, calling her ma'am and thank you, but his voice now carried a different quality. Cold, calculating. "Perfect candidate," the first voice continued. "Single mother, no education, black woman in a building full of white authority. Who's going to believe her over us?" Laughter echoed through the hallway. Eliana's heart hammered against her ribs. She carefully set down the trash bag and moved closer to the door, her small frame casting no shadow in the dim light. "How much are we talking?" Pike asked. "Enough to make it worth the risk. Enough to buy that lake house you've been eyeing." More laughter, the sound of glasses clinking. Something shifted inside Eliana in that moment. Not anger, exactly. Something colder, sharper. A clarity that settled over her like her grandmother's hands during prayer. That night, after they got home to their small apartment, Eliana knelt beside her bed, the way her grandmother had taught her. But she didn't pray for a miracle. She didn't pray for God to swoop down and fix everything like magic. "God," she whispered into the darkness, "show me what to do. Show me how to see what they're hiding." Her grandmother used to say that God answers prayers, but sometimes he answers them by opening your eyes to what's already there. Faith isn't passive, she'd said. Faith is action wrapped in trust. The next Sunday, Eliana went to her grandmother's church and found what she needed in the prayer room. An old voice-activated recorder, the kind missionaries used to use for documenting testimonies. It still worked. The batteries were fresh. "Can I borrow this, Pastor James?" she asked the youth minister. "What for, baby girl?" "School project," she said, which wasn't entirely a lie. She was learning more about justice than any classroom could teach. From that night forward, Eliana carried the recorder everywhere. She tucked it into the supply cart beneath the cleaning spray bottles. She left it running on the windowsill in Judge Vale's chambers. She placed it carefully on the shelf in the administrative break room where Ronan Pike ate his lunch. And she listened. She learned that Pike had falsified expense reports, that he'd been skimming money from the courthouse administrative fund for 2 years, that he needed someone to blame before the annual audit revealed the missing money. She learned that Judge Vale knew and looked the other way because Pike had dirt on him too, something about campaign contributions and favors owed. She learned that her mother, kind and trusting Maribel, who believed in the goodness of people even when they showed her none, was about to be sacrificed to save the reputations of men who saw her as disposable. But Eliana also started noticing things her eyes had missed before. Pike's watch changed every few weeks. She looked them up on her school library computer. Rolex, Omega, Patek Philippe. Watches that cost more than her mother made in a year. His car, a sleek silver BMW, always parked in the reserved spot. She remembered when he used to drive a Honda. The way he dressed now, tailored suits and Italian leather shoes, while her mother wore the same 3 cleaning uniforms on rotation. The pieces connected like puzzle parts, snapping into place. Money, motive, opportunity, scapegoat. But a 10-year-old girl with a voice recorder wasn't enough to fight the system. Elijana knew that much. She needed someone who understood how to use evidence, how to navigate courts, how to speak the language of law. She found Serafina Cole through a Google search, Lawyers Who Fight Corruption. Cole's website listed case after case of David versus Goliath victories. Her phone number was right there at the bottom. It took Elijana 3 days to work up the courage to call. Cole Law Firm, the receptionist answered. Hi. My name is Elijana Brooks. I'm 10 years old, and my mom is about to be framed for a crime she didn't commit. I have recordings that prove it. Silence on the other end. Then, hold please. 2 minutes later, a woman's voice came on the line. Strong, direct. This is Serafina Cole. Tell me everything. They met in a coffee shop 3 days later. Serafina, elegant in a gray suit, and Elijana, small and serious in her school uniform, sitting across from each other like co-conspirators. Play me what you have, Serafina said. Elijana pressed play. Pike's voice filled the space between them. The beauty of it is that nobody questions the help. Serafina's expression didn't change, but her eyes hardened like steel. How long have you been collecting evidence? 4 months. Does anyone know? Just you and God. Serafina smiled for the first time. That's a pretty powerful legal team. For the next 2 months, they worked in secret. Serafina filed motions, requested delays, built a case while pretending she didn't have one. Elijana kept recording, kept watching, kept praying not for revenge but for truth to have its day. The recordings multiplied. 15 conversations. 20. Evidence so clear that even a corrupt system couldn't ignore it forever. Finally, sentencing day arrived. Elijana woke before dawn. She knelt beside her bed one last time, the recorder already packed in her backpack beside her homework and her lunch. God, she whispered, today. Not a plea, a declaration. She dressed carefully in her school uniform, braided her hair the way her grandmother taught her, and walked with her mother into the courthouse where justice had failed them so many times before. But today, Elijana Brooks was going to teach them all what happens when you underestimate a child who prays with her eyes open. The courtroom was packed that morning, standing room only. Word had spread about the little girl who'd made the impossible promise, and people came to witness what they expected would be her humiliation. They came for the spectacle, for the story they'd tell at dinner parties about the delusional child who thought she could bargain with a judge. Judge Harrison Vale sat elevated in his wheelchair, positioned behind the bench like a king on a throne. His confidence filled the room like expensive cologne. He'd presided over this courthouse for 17 years, and a 10-year-old girl with delusions of grandeur wasn't going to change that. We will now proceed with sentencing, he announced, his voice carrying the finality of a closing door. Maribel Brooks, you have been found guilty of tampering with sealed court documents. Before I pass sentence, does the defendant have anything to say? Maribel stood, chains rattling, tears already streaming down her face. Your Honor, I swear before God I never touched those files. I've worked here 12 years. I would never... Enough, Vale cut her off. Your loyalty is noted and dismissed. The evidence is clear. That's when the courtroom doors opened. Serafina Cole walked in like justice itself had taken human form. Her heels clicked against the marble floor with the precision of a countdown. Every eye turned to watch this woman in an immaculate navy suit carrying a briefcase that looked expensive enough to be evidence on its own. "Your Honor," she said, her voice cutting through the shocked silence, "I am Attorney Serafina Cole, and I am here to represent the Brooks family." Vale's face tightened. "This case has already been tried. We're at sentencing." "I'm aware." Serafina placed her briefcase on the defense table and pulled out a document. "I have federal authorization to present new evidence that directly exonerates my client and exposes criminal conspiracy within this courthouse." The word federal hit the room like a thunderclap. "Federal?" Vale's voice cracked slightly. "On what grounds?" "Interstate wire fraud, embezzlement of government funds, and conspiracy to obstruct justice." She handed the document to the bailiff. "I believe you'll find everything in order." Vale's hands shook as he read. His face went from confident to confused to something approaching fear in the span of 30 seconds. "I'm also requesting," Serafina continued, "that Court Administrator Ronan Pike be detained for questioning." Pike shot to his feet. "This is absurd. I don't know what fairy tale this woman has been fed, but—" "Sit down, Mr. Pike." Serafina's voice could have frozen water. "Or the federal agents waiting outside will escort you down." Pike sat, but his face had gone pale as chalk. "Your Honor, if you'll allow me to present the evidence." Vale looked like a man watching his entire world crack beneath him, but he nodded slowly. Serafina pulled out a small recorder and placed it on the evidence table. "What you're about to hear are recordings made over the course of 4 months documenting conversations between Mr. Pike and several courthouse employees, including your administrative assistant, Thomas Mitchell." She pressed play. Pike's voice filled the courtroom. "The beauty of it is that nobody questions the help. You need a scapegoat. You pick the one person who has access but no power to fight back." The courtroom erupted in gasps. Another voice. "Maribel?" Pike's response, dripping with contempt. "Perfect candidate. Single mother, no education, black woman in a building full of white authority. Who's going to believe her over us?" Laughter on the recording. Cruel, careless laughter. Serafina let it play. 15 seconds. 30. A full minute of men plotting to destroy an innocent woman's life over cocktails and confidence. More recordings followed. Plans to falsify documents. Discussions of the skimmed money. Jokes about how easy it would be to frame the cleaning lady. Pike was standing now, backing toward the door. "This is illegal. This is entrapment. This—" The courtroom doors opened again. 2 federal agents in dark suits stepped inside. "Ronan Pike," one of them said, "you need to come with us." Pike's face crumbled. The luxury watch on his wrist caught the light one last time as they led him away in handcuffs. The courtroom had gone completely silent except for Maribel's sobbing. But these were different tears now. Relief, disbelief, liberation. Judge Vale sat frozen behind his bench, his face ashen. His entire body had gone rigid, hands gripping the armrests of his wheelchair with white-knuckled intensity. And then something happened that made every person in that room hold their breath. Vale gasped. His legs, motionless for 5 years, twitched. Not imagination, not a trick of light, a visible, unmistakable movement. "What?" he whispered, staring down at his own body in horror and confusion. A tingling sensation, he would later tell doctors, like lightning crawling up from his feet. Sensation where there had been nothing but void for half a decade. Vale gripped the bench harder, his eyes wide with something between terror and wonder. Elijana stood slowly, her small frame somehow filling the space. She walked toward the bench, each step measured and deliberate, until she stood directly before the judge who had mocked her faith and prepared to destroy her mother. She looked up at him with those two old eyes, and in the breathless silence, she whispered just loud enough for the courtroom to hear, "God still speaks." The silence that followed Eliana's whispered words was the kind that belongs to sacred spaces, to moments when the ordinary world cracks open and something beyond explanation pushes through. Judge Harrison Vale stared at his legs like they belonged to someone else. The tingling had become impossible to ignore now, spreading from his feet up through his calves, sensation returning to places that had been dead for 5 years. His breath came in short, panicked gasps. "Bailiff!" Serafina's voice cut through the shock, steady and professional. "I move for immediate dismissal of all charges against Maribel Brooks. The evidence clearly demonstrates she was framed as part of a criminal conspiracy." The bailiff looked to Judge Vale, but the judge seemed incapable of speech. He was still staring at his own body, his hands trembling on the armrests of his wheelchair. "Your Honor," the bailiff prompted. Vale's head snapped up. Whatever was happening to him physically, he was still a judge, still clinging to the authority that had defined him for nearly 2 decades. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. "The charges against Maribel Brooks are dismissed. All evidence will be sealed pending federal investigation." The words came out mechanically, as if spoken by a man going through motions while his mind processed something far more impossible. A bailiff moved to unlock Maribel's chains. The metal cuffs fell away with a sound that seemed to echo through the entire courthouse. Maribel collapsed into her daughter's arms, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. "My baby," she kept whispering. "My baby, what did you do?" "What you taught me, Mama," Elijah said softly, holding her mother with the fierce strength of someone who'd carried impossible weight for far too long. "I paid attention, I prayed, and I didn't give up." The courtroom remained frozen, every person bearing witness to something they couldn't quite name. Some would later describe it as the moment truth became tangible. Others would use the language of their churches, speaking of God moving in mysterious ways. A few cynics would dismiss it all as coincidence, but everyone saw what happened next. Judge Harrison Vale gripped the edge of his bench and pushed. His legs, dormant for half a decade, responded. Not smoothly, not easily. His whole body shook with the effort, muscles that had forgotten their purpose struggling to remember. Sweat broke out on his forehead, his face contorted with concentration and something approaching terror. But slowly, impossibly, Harrison Vale rose from his wheelchair. He stood. The courtroom erupted in gasps. Someone screamed. A reporter dropped their notebook, the clatter obscenely loud in the charged atmosphere. Vale stood there for exactly 7 seconds, trembling like a newborn colt, his eyes wide with shock and confusion. Then his legs buckled, and he crashed back into his wheelchair with a grunt of pain and exhaustion. "Someone call a doctor," the bailiff shouted. But Elijah simply watched, her expression unreadable. When the chaos around her finally quieted enough for her voice to carry, she spoke. "It's not magic," she said. Her voice was still that of a child, but it carried a weight that made grown men lean forward to hear. "It's consequence. God doesn't just heal people because we ask nicely. He heals to prove a point." Serafina put a hand on Elijah's shoulder, both protective and proud. "What point?" someone in the gallery shouted. Elijah looked directly at Judge Vale, who was staring at her like she was something holy and terrifying all at once. That power without justice is just cruelty with a title. That God sees everything, even what happens in rooms where poor people aren't allowed to speak. That healing your legs doesn't mean healing your heart. She paused, then added with devastating simplicity, "You can walk now, but you still have to live with what you were willing to do when you couldn't." The words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading through the assembled crowd. Paramedics arrived within minutes. They examined Judge Vale with a mixture of professional confusion and poorly concealed amazement. Sensation had returned to his lower extremities. Muscle response was present. Reflexes were functioning. Everything their instruments told them said this shouldn't be possible. Yet here it was, undeniable and documented. "It's like," one paramedic murmured to another, not quietly enough, "like his body just decided to wake up all at once." Neurological shock, a doctor would later write in the official report, because medicine requires terminology even for miracles. Spontaneous nerve regeneration following extreme psychological stress, exceptionally rare, but documented in medical literature. But that would be later. In the moment, Judge Harrison Vale was wheeled out of his own courtroom by paramedics, his career effectively over. By the end of the week, he would resign. Federal investigators would find irregularities in dozens of cases he'd presided over, patterns of bias and corruption that stretched back years. The investigation expanded like cracks in ice. Thomas Mitchell, Vale's assistant, was arrested the next day. 3 other court employees were suspended pending review. The entire administrative structure of the courthouse came under federal scrutiny. Reforms were initiated. New oversight committees were formed. Policies were changed to ensure that people like Maribel, people at the bottom of the power structure, couldn't be sacrificed so easily to protect those at the top. But all of that would take months to unfold. That day, in the aftermath of impossible things, Maribel Brooks walked out of the courthouse a free woman. News cameras swarmed them on the steps, reporters shouting questions about miracles and justice and the girl who'd promised the impossible. Elijana ignored them all. She walked beside her mother, small hand in large hand, until they reached the sidewalk where her grandmother waited, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Grandma," Elijana said simply, and fell into arms that had held her through every prayer, every doubt, every moment of preparation for this day. "You did good, baby," her grandmother whispered. "You did so good." But Elijana pulled back, her expression serious. "I didn't do it for praise. I did it because it was right." That night, back in their small apartment with its peeling wallpaper and secondhand furniture, Elijana knelt beside her bed one last time. She bowed her head, her braids falling forward, and prayed not words of celebration, but words of thanks. Thanks for eyes that could see truth. Thanks for ears that could hear injustice. Thanks for a mother who taught her that invisible doesn't mean powerless. Thanks for faith that wasn't passive, but active, that understood preparation and prayer as partners rather than opposites. When she finally climbed into bed, Maribel came to tuck her in like she'd done every night of Elijana's life. But tonight, the chains were gone. Tonight, they were both free. "Baby," Maribel whispered, "how did you know? How did you know it would work?" Elijana thought about that for a long moment, her young face ancient in the dim light of her bedroom. "I didn't know he would walk, Mama. That part was up to God. But I knew truth was stronger than lies. And I knew that faith without action is just hoping. Grandma taught me that." Maribel kissed her daughter's forehead, tasting salt from her own tears. "You saved me." "No, Mama. God saved you. I just paid attention." The story of Elijana Brooks would spread far beyond that courthouse. It would be told in churches and schools, debated in legal circles and medical journals. Some would call it miracle. Others would call it coincidence dressed in spiritual language. But everyone who heard it had to reckon with the same truth, that a 10-year-old black girl with nothing but faith and a voice recorder had brought down a system designed to crush people exactly like her. That justice sometimes comes from the smallest voices, that God still speaks, if we're brave enough to listen and act on what we hear, that the impossible is only impossible until someone believes enough to make it real, and that healing, when it comes, doesn't always look like mercy. Sometimes it looks like consequence. Sometimes the miracle isn't in the walking. Sometimes the miracle is in the courage to stand up when the whole world tells you to sit down, be quiet, and accept injustice as inevitable. Elijana Brooke stood up, and the impossible answered back.